This enlightening episode of the Colours of Parenthood, we welcome Alex, an exceptional father of four and the primary caregiver in his family. Making the bold decision to step back from his flourishing career to become a stay at home dad, Alex sets himself apart in a role mostly occupied by mothers. He delves into the obstacle he's faced, the triumphs he's had, and the wisdom he's gained in his remarkable journey. This one's for the forerunners who courageously usher in change through their everyday choices. Hello, everyone. Today we have Alex with us. Alex, could you please share a bit about yourself and your transitioning into fatherhood?
Sure. So my name is Alex. Was an aerospace engineer for most of my career, and I have four sons. I live in Northern California, and my transition into fatherhood was a lot of unexpected surprises. I didn't really know that much about babies. I hadn't held one maybe before I was handed one in the hospital, and I just loved it right away. My wife always says that I became a father when she left to go back to work and left me at home on paternity leave with my son. And when she left on Monday, I was nervous and afraid. And then by the time she came home at the end of the workday on Friday from 1 week of it, she said I was really a dad then.
That's amazing. And does that mean that she took a maternity leave, but just for a while?
So
Or,
in the United States, she took 3 months,
okay.
and maybe a few extra weeks from that. And then I took over after that point. So I was home for one week or maybe 10 days after the baby was first born. Then I went back to work, and then I had 10 weeks with my son, and where she went back to work, and then we put him into daycare after that.
Okay. And how was going back to work after having a week being just a dad?
After just a week, it I think I was still in shock. I mean, I really didn't understand kind of what had happened, and I don't remember anything about those first few months. It was just trying to stay awake at work and then come home and help out with my wife, who obviously was trying to recover from the whole process, as well as feeding the baby and just doing everything I could to help out. So yeah, it was just such a scramble at the beginning.
Yeah. And what is the biggest obstacle with transitioning into being a dad from a man?
Well, I think for me it was very interesting because there were parts of it that I was very excited about, and then there were parts of it that were just a really big surprise, and I don't think I expected at all. I didn't really know how much becoming a dad would affect me thinking about my own dad and my own sort of childhood. And it certainly brought up a lot of new elements about my family that I didn't really expect. So it was a little bit interesting to be processing that at the same time as going through so many other changes as well. And I think as a dad, we're generally expected to be a little bit more stoic, not really show our emotions as much, but that was never really who I was. So I think it certainly was a struggle to maintain the balance of understanding my emotions, trying to see what they were telling me, but at the same time thinking about what being a dad really meant and how I wanted to do it, especially as compared to how it had been sort of modeled in my life.
And as you just said, like societal expectations are more like men should not be vulnerable or just be really emotional. Have you ever felt this in the society, like you being judged or being looked at differently?
I worried about that for a long time. Um, when I was 11 years old, my dad took his own life after sort of many years of struggle with depression and lots of other mental health problems. And so I was already a pretty sensitive person, but kind of in the decade after that, I didn't really have a choice. My emotions were really raw, and I sort of displayed them whenever they came out. I didn't have a lot of choice about it, especially kind of the first few years. And I was really self conscious about that for a while, but I think I didn't really understand why, or I didn't really think about it a lot. And in time, I realized that even when I did show my emotions around other people, for the most part, they didn't really react or they didn't really have any negative sort of feeling about it. And I think in time, it just made me feel better about just being who I was and whatever I was feeling okay to express it, even though that wasn't sort of the standard.
Yeah, but maybe this is because it's just a standard, I guess, because maybe a lot of people are just afraid to show it because of the reactions they might have from other people. But apparently, maybe other people are really liberal when it comes to that, and they wouldn't. Yeah. I wanted to ask you because I know that you're a stay-at-home dad, but could you please share about how that happened?
Yeah, so that was never really the plan. I had a career as an aerospace engineer. I was working for a big company that I'd worked for about 9 years when my first son was born. I very quickly realized after coming back from my time off, taking care of my son, that actually this job that I had thought was kind of the perfect one for having a family wasn't right for me at all. And the main reason was I just didn't feel connected to the job. And all of a sudden, my new perspective of my time is so valuable. Every minute I spend at work is time away from my son. And there's so many amazing things happening in his life. I don't want to miss out on it. But I didn't really want to be a stay at home parent at that point either. I just wanted to make sure that I had a job that the time that I spent away from him felt valuable, that I felt like I was making a contribution, that I felt like it was something useful for the world and not just sort of turning a crank and collecting a paycheck. So I left that first job to go work at a startup that I never expected. That's very out of character for me. I took all sorts of twists and turns at that startup, and then eventually that company went out of business again after about 9 or 10 years working there. And I at that point, it was sort of 2021. The pandemic was really weighing on my family. I had 4 kids at that point, and we just knew that there wasn't any way to start a new adventure with all of the sort of constraints we had around kids and sick days and daycare and things like that. So I decided that I would take a step back and kind of be the lead dad of the family for a little while. And my wife loves her job. It was going great, so she would keep working. And the expectation was this would be like, oh, maybe a few months, 6 months tops to kind of get everybody settled and the pandemic would hopefully be winding down. And after about 6 months, it turned out my oldest son was feeling very, very depressed. He was really struggling, and it just wasn't time to pick up a new job for me. And so we kicked the can down the road, and eventually just said, you know what? I don't think there's really going to be a stable moment. We have one son who really needs a lot of help and support. On any given day, he'll just sort of feel very, very down and need a lot of parent attention. We had twins at the time they were 2 who needed to get out into the world, and they obviously require a lot of attention too. So we kind of shifted into maybe I should find some way to have a job or do something that would be a little more flexible. So I started my own business as basically doing coaching, and that allowed me to kind of stay the lead dad and be on call for when the kids are sick or all of the pickups and drops offs and everything we need to do.
Amazing. And have you ever felt from like societal how have you ever felt that they felt differently about you because you were the go-to parent?
Yeah, there's definitely moments where I have um, going to the park with my little ones and
Yeah.
seeing everybody else at the park is, moms or nannies, and I'm the only dad there. That's, I don't say that I'm treated differently, but you certainly kind of feel a little bit different in those situations. And I think, honestly, the biggest adjustment was required was in me. I had sort of always expected to have this wonderful career and this wonderful family and be able to do it all together. And realizing that we couldn't do that, that we needed somebody to stay home, and that I wasn't getting a paycheck. I wasn't furthering my career. It didn't feel like I was making any progress. I think that was really the hardest part. And I know that that was a big part of my family and the way I was raised, but also those societal expectations that, the man makes a paycheck. And it took me a while to get over the idea that just being a dad was enough. And in my family, it hadn't gone the way that we had planned, but that was okay. We just needed a different plan. So I think the hardest part of it, I never felt too much sort of interactions from the outside world, but it really took a lot of work for me to get over it myself and be kind of accepting of the idea that I was a dad first, and that's what my family needed, and that was okay.
Yeah, I can imagine that this was a pretty hard decision because it's a transition from like just your own identity in your own dreams and actually believing that something else is another dream. And have you ever felt regretting this decision?
No, and what's interesting is my dream was always focused on my family. And so it sort of, I'd say what I realized was that there was a part of my identity that was really wrapped up in what success looked like and how it was important to have a good job. And that part had kind of gotten frozen maybe when I was a teenager or in my early 20s when I was kind of very energetic and had plans on everything I was going to do. But it really wasn't who I was today. And so I never felt any regret. I think the most interesting thing was to sort of observe that part of my identity that had was frozen in time from my growing up and my experiences, and how hard it was to dislodge that, even though kind of in my brain I knew this doesn't make any sense. It's much more important to me that my family be healthy and that we all be taken care of than I be successful at my career. But it still felt off when I did that.
Well, when you say success, it's just a really relative term. Like, what is success actually? So it's really subjective. And you found your success in another way, not in the career path. But I wanted to ask you, I'm curious, has your wife ever shared with you the fact that she experienced that you're the go-to parent and she's the one going to work every day, being
Yeah,
weird?
yeah. I mean, I'd say one of the things we had to grapple with early on was, and I think we still there's a balance to it even today, is her feeling guilt around not being there for the family enough. And she is an extremely present parent. She does a great job managing her career and being around. But I think there is a little part of her that feels like, well, that's supposed to be my job too. And we have, I'll say, mini battles that are, not actual fights, but around sort of who should be doing what chores. And she kind of tries to pitch in more and extra. And I'll kind of say, look, you had to work all day. I can do the dishes. You can have a seat. It's no, I want to help out too. So I think there is definitely a piece of it that makes her feel like also she really needs to be contributing. And I certainly don't want to take that away from her. I feel like she's contributing tons with what she does. But I know that there is that balance in her feeling like she's contributing enough because she sees how much I'm doing, but also recognizing you're the one who's bringing in most of the money. You're the one who gives us health insurance. So all of these other benefits that are sort of hidden behind it that are hard for her to feel as much.
That's really interesting because there is a term called dad guilt, and usually the dads who are working full time, those they are feeling guilty because they're not present enough, and this is the other way around.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think
Yeah.
this one in particular plays into the stereotypes, kind of like you mentioned, of it. It's we each have the guilt around it, but it's sort of the opposite one that of the typical genders because we have it switched, right?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you because you said you had four kids. Could you please tell me like how old they are, like between?
Sure. So the oldest one is 11, the next one is 8, and then I have twin 4-year-olds, all boys.
Great. And how is so? What is the age difference between your oldest and next? Sorry.
It was about 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Okay, so how was the transition again, going back to being a dad for a 2-year-old and then again having a baby?
Yeah, that is actually interesting because when people ask, oh, 4 kids, that must be so hard. For us, the hardest transition we ever had in the process was actually going from 1 to 2 kids. Because from 0 to 1, we sort of knew like, oh, this is going to be a big change, and we were kind of ready for it. When we went from 1 to 2, I think we didn't really expect there to be that much of a change because we'd already been through it once. We figured, oh, we know what we're doing. We understand. We have all of these systems built. And of course, I think like many people experience with their second kid, he was completely different than the first. The things that worked with the first one didn't work at all with the second. And we sort of threw all of what we knew about parenting on its head, but at the same time, we hadn't really sort of planned in for the idea that this would be another big transition. And interestingly enough, we really kind of struggled in a way that we never had in our relationship with communication, with being on the same page. Those were things that we'd really not ever had problems with. And so we didn't really have ways to resolve it very well. And we had to kind of take a step back and say, whoa, we're both trying as hard as we can here. We both love each other and the kids. Why are we kind of having these difficulties? And so we ended up going into couples therapy, which felt like, oh my goodness, how are we going to find time for this on top of everything else? But we were really glad we did. I mean, we were in it for probably not long, maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 tops. But it really kind of rebuilt the foundation of the communication that we needed. And it turned out that, we really were each struggling with various parts of having 2 kids and balancing time and balancing work. And by reopening those channels, years later, we said, okay, well, let's, try for a girl. We always wanted to have a girl. We got 2 more boys, so we understood the universe sending its message. But honestly, like, we had built all of the systems we needed to be ready for that. And it was a huge challenge in terms of time and juggling and energy. But it really didn't test our relationship the same way that going from 1 kid to 2 actually did.
Okay, that's interesting. Most of the people that I talk to, they're like, okay, my second child was better because I already knew what to do, as you said. But and there is also this expectation usually with couples saying that when they have a kid, everything like they will be closer and their connection would be stronger. Have you thought about that when you had your first kid?
Yeah, and I think that was another piece of what happened going from 1 to 2 is that we definitely knew that that was something to look out for, and were very mindful of it as we had our first child, and made sure to stay connected and do things together. And then when the second one came, that was one of the things that kind of went by the wayside. We weren't nearly as intentional about spending time together and making sure that we were kind of connecting just us, not as parents, and not, just the logistics of getting through the day, but what really is going on, how are they feeling, what are they feeling frustrated about. And I think that was really what we learned in couples therapy, is that it wasn't we needed to change anything about our parenting. We just needed to make sure that we were using our time to connect with each other as well as the kids.
Yeah, that must be really hard to find time like for each other.
Yeah.
Having 2 kids and having four, I can't imagine. And how is it now? Would you say like having 4 kids and having your wife beside you?
I mean, we have gotten so good at kind of the shorthand of communication. So in a lot of cases now, the things that we used to have to discuss and explain, it just takes us a lot less time to do, or we don't even need to do it because one of us sees what the other one is doing and just knows, okay, that means my job is to do this. So I think the patterns we've built and the trust is there, and that has made it so much easier. And so now we never lose sight of kind of each other and what they're going through and what we need to be doing to support the family, ourselves, each other. And so I feel like the relationship has gotten a lot stronger because of all of the sort of difficulties and challenges, such that now we aren't really phased by the things that come up anymore. We know, okay, well, we don't see eye to eye on this quite yet. That's okay. We don't have to solve it this minute. We'll keep talking about it. We'll keep collecting data. One of the big things in our relationship was I really like to make plans and decisions. I like to know exactly how things are going to go. And having kids taught me the skill that I really needed was sometimes you just have to wait. Sometimes you don't need to decide the night before, oh, is this one too sick to go to school tomorrow? My wife would just say, we're just going to get through the night. We'll wake up in the morning, we'll take temperatures, and we'll decide. And for a long time, I really fought that. And I think that was really one of the skills I had to build, was to let go of needing to plan everything and just be okay with things coming my way. And, it was a really good thing that my wife had kind of the balance of that was how she naturally was. So I could kind of learn from her and follow her lead. And when I became more trusting of that, again, a lot of things got easier. She'll just kind of nudge me when I'm getting a little too over planning. She'll say, okay, we don't know yet. That we can't decide. We're going to have to wait. Okay, got it. So that's not a this minute decision. We're collecting data and we'll decide at the appropriate time later.
Yeah, I can't imagine like everything being planned and going as it's planned when you have 4 kids.
Yeah. Almost nothing
Um,
goes to plan.
so people need to build resilience and tolerance with not happening as it's planned.
Yeah, well, and I
Um,
think one of the big pieces for that for me was also I was a very anxious person, and the planning was a way of coping with my anxiety. And so it
mhm.
was a big wake up call that I needed to take the time and energy to really learn how to manage the anxiety so that I could be more open and accepting of these situations. And it really, I have been through a lot of mental health struggles. Obviously, with my dad's history, it was something to keep an eye on and I've always been worried about. But I thought that I was managing my anxiety really well. And it turns out that it was still having this kind of big effect on the way I was parenting. And I really needed to do it more. So it was another, one of the big lessons with parenting is that it really is a lot about working on yourself and understanding, why am I having these reactions? Why are these things so important to me? And by understanding those things about myself, then I'm ready to do it for my kids and model the appropriate behaviors. But I don't think I expected how much of it about would be about sort of understanding myself and understanding my own triggers and emotions, and that element of it being so important to how I then show up for my kids.
Yeah, this is beautiful, I would say. Like what you just said, like identifying your own reactions when you're a parent and actually learning more about yourself in order to be a better parent. Um, I wanted to ask you, when your wife became pregnant and she delivered the baby, there is a lot of like focus on the mom, on the baby specifically, not enough focus on the mom, but more on the mom than the dad. Have you felt that?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that there are so many elements of it that you really hear a lot about how it affects the mom, and the support for the dads is starting to come through. But just simple things, you mentioned the pregnancy, and then the baby being born, but things like miscarriage and, dad support for that. That's not something we experienced, but I know people who did. And it is, again, a really traumatic thing for the mom. And then the dads are just sort of told, well, your job is to be there for your partner. But that's hard because they have their own process, their own emotions. And in a lot of cases, like you've mentioned, society isn't always so welcoming of the dads having those emotions. um, it can be really mixed. There are really hard parts of being a dad of a newborn because, in some respect, you see this really beautiful connection between the mom and the baby, and there's only so much you can do to kind of be a part of it. And it's kind of hard to set that aside and say, okay, well, my job is just to clean these dirty clothes right now, and that's how I'm building connection while the mom is snuggling and nursing and doing all these things. So, I was really happy to be there and part of it, but there is certainly an element to it that is challenging emotionally when you want to be there, but you either don't know what to do or you can't do the things that need doing. And your job is really just to be that support person. And I think that takes a lot of kind of a mind shift of, oh, I'm going to be a great dad. And what does that look like in the moment isn't always what you envision ahead of time.
Yeah, I've heard that from other dads, and it's definitely like through me because I didn't have this perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
it makes a lot of sense. Like you look at your wife, she just delivered the baby, and she can feed her, and she has the natural ways of feeding the baby, whereas dads cannot. So I can imagine that this emotional attachment that the baby has with the mom is just making the dad feel left out.
And one of
Yeah.
the funny stories is when we had our first son. so this is obviously, I was still an anxious person at this point. I hadn't done a lot of the work around it. We were in the hospital. The baby was born we went into the hospital, I think 2 a.m. So we didn't sleep the first night. And the baby came, my first son was born at maybe 2 in the afternoon. So it was about 12 hours, my poor wife. Um, and then, we had all of this going on. I didn't really sleep that next night. And my wife had medication. She had all these people looking after her. She was getting food delivered. And I was there just sort of being super anxious. I didn't really sleep for 2 days. I didn't really eat anything. And my wife says, when you look at the picture of us sort of like leaving the hospital, she said, you wouldn't know which one of us is the one that just had a major baby, because I actually look like I'm in worse shape than she is, because nobody was taking care of me. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I felt terrible. And so, that was one of the things as we went in to have the second baby, my wife said, okay, this time you have to remember to take care of you, because there's nobody else here to do it. I'll be fine. Oh, right. Okay. So, but yeah, it was very, I wanted to be so much a part of it that I sort of completely forgot to even do anything for myself for 2 days. And, then I was in terrible shape too, and there was nobody to help out with the baby. So it's really important to remember, as a dad, you're going through a lot too, but you still need to take care of yourself.
Definitely. What you just said, like, definitely. Dads should take care of themselves. And because there is a lot of people saying, like, he has to be the support figure.
Mhm.
And I reckon this can be really pressuring also. Like, you might feel guilt if you're not the rock that you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was actually, it was helpful as a wake-up call, because we very quickly moved into, all right, let's each of us focus on our strengths. What do each of us do well, and how can we, put that into raising our kids, as opposed to both of us need to do everything. So, one of the patterns we very quickly realized was that my wife has no problem waking up and doing something and then going right back to sleep, but I'm not very good at that at all. But I do wake up early most mornings, and I'm perfectly happy to be up at 5 or 6 in the morning and take care of kids. So, the division of labor was, well, she covers the first half of the night, I cover the second half of the night, and then each of us gets some time to sleep and then some time to kind of be in charge and take over. And it's not both of us all the time, and it's not one parent just sort of dragging through every day. But that really kind of worked to our strengths and made us a much more effective team. But we had to talk about it and recognize these are our strengths and this is how we need to do it for us.
Yeah, I think this is really important to basically adapt for yourself and your partner. What's the best thing that works? So you can schedule things around, and the sleep deprivation could be a bit less
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, because you've touched upon the topic about being emotional and being vulnerable in front of people. How do you teach your four sons when it comes to that? Because it's this the stigma around men and like women is quite huge. So when you have four sons and you're the stay-at-home dad, you should. How do you do that?
Well, I think in some respects, there's two parts of it, I think. One of them is I don't really worry about it too much. So mostly it's just through modeling it. Since it's not something I'm too concerned about, I just show my emotions like I always have. And they're just used to that. So to them, it's not as big a deal. And I've seen cases where certainly somebody has had a reaction, not necessarily my kids, but somewhere where kids were having, and other kids kind of saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, or stop crying, or something. And my kids are kind of like, well, why would you say that? Why would you tell them to stop crying? They're upset, let them cry. So I've seen that this acceptance of emotions in our house has colored their thoughts such that they don't even really see anything that's wrong with it. They have no expectation that it should be different. The flip side is that we try to teach them that expressing your emotion is useful and it's definitely something you want to be able to do, but also emotions are just clues about what's going on, and that shouldn't stand in the way of action. You have emotions give you clues, but actions are what you choose to do, and the real strength comes in choosing your actions even when you're having strong emotions. And this especially because, again, my kids are all 50% of me. And so they all have very strong emotions too. And just sitting there crying about something is a good way to let out your emotion. But there comes a point, an age, a situation where you realize, well, this isn't actually helping me get what I want, or this isn't accomplishing anything. So I can feel upset, but I don't need to sit and cry about it. I can say, okay, I'm upset, but what am I going to do to actually solve the problem? So there is kind of two sides to it, which is they're okay to show emotions, but then also we don't want to go so far off the deep end that all they
Yeah.
do is express emotions and forget, no, this is just the first part. Now you have to use your emotions to take the right actions.
Yeah, as you said, like emotions can be cues to what to do. Amazing. Um, and I'm also curious because being a stay-at-home dad, the lead parent, etc., usually moms have forums or like communities and a lot of groups. And I reckon that it's really hard, as you said, being in the like the playground and being the only dad. Have you felt that this need, the same need that moms have for being in the community of dads?
Some, I think part of it is that I never really associated gender very strongly. So I certainly hang out with a lot of other moms that we have met along the way, through daycare and school and things like that. And I don't put a lot of emphasis on, oh, their experience is so much different because they're a mom. Certainly it is. But I think in a lot of the ways, or a lot of the challenges we face as parents, it's not so different that the gender part matters. But I will say that as I started to go out online and meet other dads and see them, there was sort of a positive experience of seeing other dads who saw the world the same way I did and were having the same experiences. The lead dad comment or title from Paul Sullivan, things like that. People like that who are really kind of going out there and making it known and doing it out loud. It did make me feel better about it once I started to see that. I'm so glad that that is starting to be more common and available to people.
Yeah, because I reckon that should made you feel more understandable and also not alone. Because usually mothers really like when I speak with them and also because I work with them, it's more like I just need to feel not alone. So they search for other communities and talk about their issues with their kids or their partner, and this makes them feel understood and not alone, which is what everybody wants at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Um, And I was curious, where does your kids also understand the idea of like this not being the societal norm, whereas it should be like not to have like differences between moms and dads, but it's not still. So do they understand it and feel it?
I think a little bit. They certainly will ask questions when they're younger around how come this person's mommy is always there, or things like that. My 4-year-olds are definitely in the we want mommy for everything we can have her for, because I spend a lot of time with them and she is a very warm and loving and caring person. So they, I would say, are at a point where they're a little more sensitive of other of their friends spend, feel like their moms are there a little bit more than theirs are. And I don't think that's actually true. I think because it's not like they don't have dinner with her every night and she doesn't always put them to bed. I mean, she's there and part of their lives, but just out in public, I'm more likely to be the one who takes them to school or things like that. And I think they're just pulling on the thread of we want to see both our parents as much as possible. So mama's the one who we need to really angle for time for. The older ones, we're very fortunate where we live. It's very common to have both moms and dads be present, come to sports games and coach teams and things like that. So I don't think it stands out too much for them. But every once in a while, they'll sort of make a comment that makes me think, oh, they've noticed that this is not exactly the experience that all of their friends are having it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, it's not an issue or anything, but when you're a kid, you're just out there and seeing all those moms with their
Mhm.
kids, and you're with your dad. And I, I can imagine if you're a little kid, you just start comparing. Something is different with me. Something is different with my family situation. Um, But also what you've said about your sons wanting their mom, that's what I hear from my cousin, for instance. Like he always like talk about his dad because he's with his mom usually more. So this is the way it goes, I guess.
Yeah.
And because our time is going to the end, I just wanted to ask you, what would you say to a soon-to-be father about the dynamics within the transitioning into being a dad? So what would your advice be in that sense?
Well, I think first off, expect that anything you think is going to go a certain way is probably not. And so prepare yourself for the unexpected in lots of ways, in good ways and in bad ways. The next one would be recognize that it is your job to be the model for what you want your kid to be. And the living your life the way that you want them to live is the easiest way to fulfill that. You can tell them to be a certain way all you want, but they're really going to follow what they see in action. And so you have to be very mindful of the decisions you make, the way that you act around other people. You know, are you kind to their partner? Are you, your partner? Are you kind to people you see out in the world? How do you behave? Because that's how they will. They'll follow those cues much more than anything you sort of suggest to them. And the last piece is recognize that that time when they're little, those first few years has such an impact on the way that they're going to view the world. And it also is such a special time you can't get back. And so don't get too caught up in the little decisions and the little frustrations and the little setbacks, because those things that you're upset about at the beginning, that you feel, I can't believe I have to do another load of laundry, I can't believe I have to hold this baby to put him to sleep for 30 minutes, in another 2, 3, 5 years, you'll look back and say, oh, I wish I had another chance to hold that baby for 30 minutes. And so it's real easy to get caught up in sort of the difficulties and challenges of parenting. But from somebody who's come out the other side, what I always want to tell them is you really need to try to your absolute best to be present and enjoy these moments, because even the worst ones you will miss. And you will look back and say, oh, I wish that I'd really been able to enjoy those moments instead of just being so frustrated and exhausted and angry and short-tempered at that time.
That was beautifully said. And would you say that you felt like your advice after becoming a dad, after your first kid?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly I did not learn any of that until at least my second kid.
Okay.
And it is, my oldest son sometimes notes the way that we parent the twins, who they came, 4 years after our second son, basically, is so different than he got. And it was because we had been through the process and realized, oh, this is our last time at this. And we were much easier going. We were much more forgiving. We were much more understanding. And he says, oh, how come I didn't get parented like that? And I say, well, you were the trial one. We had to learn with you. And they'll say, well, that's not fair. And I said, no, it's not. But you also got 2.5 years where you got all the attention. And these guys never got that. He goes, okay, I guess that's all right then. So I think it definitely opened my eyes to how much the big decisions matter, but the little ones don't. And we certainly got so caught up in the little decisions with our first kid, and even with our second to some extent. That was another kind of piece that we really worked through, was perfection is not the goal. And we're going to make mistakes. And what matters is how you come back from that, and how you repair with your spouse when you make a mistake and do something that makes their life harder, or your kid when you don't show up the way that you want to. What really matters is, can you, without ego, with selflessly say, this was my mistake. I'm sorry I did this. Here's how I'm going to learn from it and do better. And just doing that over and over again, and getting used to those little hiccups instead of getting mad at yourself, getting mad at your kids, blaming them and saying, you're the one who caused this. Of course they did, but they're 3. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
It's your job to be regulated, not theirs. So really working through that, and then, like I said, kind of just taking it easy and not worrying so much about every little detail and just trusting it's going to be okay and that everyone's doing their best.
Yeah, and that made me think just to ask you, are you feeling ready, like confidently to be a dad now? Like, would you say, I feel ready to have another kid? Like, I know what to do?
Yeah, and I mean it really did come from, I'd say, the times that I spent as a solo dad at all the
Mm.
various stages. It was great that my wife is there and has been very supportive, but it was, the 10 weeks that I spent with a 3-month old on my own having to make those decisions, and the times when a kid is homesick and you have to decide what to do, or, the times I stepped back from my career and I had these two-year olds that I had to go through every day with and then get them transitioned into daycare. Being a dad and having your partner trust you to say, okay, this is your job and I'm just going to step back and let it go. And we can talk about how it goes later, and some things are going to go well and some things are going to make a mistake. But I think that's another piece, is that dads don't need to be afraid to make mistakes, but also they need to be given an opportunity to do it on their own, because it really will build a different set of muscles if you have to be the decider, make the decisions, get through the challenges on your own, and know that you're trusted, you're going to do fine, you're going to learn from your mistakes and get better.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, and I think a lot of women are struggling with letting the dad struggle to get things done on his own and trusting him. So I can imagine like this is feeling for fulfilling. Also, your partner trusting you, and you've made it with so many years with so many kids.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So our time has ended, but this was amazing, and I learned a lot. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us.
Yeah.
I
Thank you
hope
so
you
much for
enjoyed it.
having me.